The signs had been gathering for years, yet many chose to look away. Used car lots that once brimmed with confident salesmen and glossy advertisements now sat half-empty, their asphalt yards echoing a silence more unnerving than any chorus of aggressive haggling. Prices that once commanded respect and urgency crumbled in front of bewildered owners who had paid premiums not long ago. Dealers whispered it among themselves at first, then reluctantly admitted it aloud. The used car market apocalypse had finally arrived. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The shift was not sudden, though it felt like a tidal wave when it finally crested. For more than a decade, the used car market had been buoyed by unusual forces: supply chain disruptions, chip shortages, pandemic-era demand spikes, and consumer desperation. Vehicles once seen as disposable commodities gained a strange aura of scarcity and status. People paid nearly new car prices for models with tens of thousands of miles on the odometer, hoping merely to get behind the wheel before another shortage hit. But markets inflated beyond their natural limits eventually faced correction, and this one did so with a severity few imagined possible. As inventories surged and consumer wallets tightened, the very logic underpinning used car valuations fractured. Cars that had once been traded like assets suddenly revealed themselves for what they truly were: depreciating machines, burdened by mileage, wear, and outdated technology. The illusion that a used car could appreciate or at least hold its value collapsed overnight. Dealers who had stacked their lots with overpriced SUVs and trucks watched the numbers plummet with each passing week, their balance sheets bleeding red. Some tried desperate promotional tactics, extended financing, lifetime warranties, even offering cash rebates on used models. But the weight of reality pressed too heavily. The economic implications extended far beyond the lots themselves. Auto lenders, who had happily underwritten inflated loans during the boom, now found themselves staring at mountains of bad debt. Borrowers who owed more than their cars were worth, often by staggering margins, simply walked away, abandoning vehicles to repossession. Auction yards overflowed, rows upon rows of repossessed sedans and trucks sitting like monuments to misplaced optimism. Lenders scrambled to restructure their portfolios, but the cascade of defaults proved relentless. For consumers, the sting was personal. Thousands of families suddenly saw their savings evaporate into the black hole of negative equity. Manufacturers, too, felt the tremors. The used car ecosystem has always fed the new car market, with trade-ins serving as stepping stones for buyers moving up the ladder. But when trade-in values collapsed, so too did the pathway to new vehicle purchases. A buyer who once counted on their 3-year-old crossover to shave thousands off the sticker of a factory-fresh model now found themselves trapped. With their trade-in worth a fraction of the loan balance, they could neither sell nor upgrade, creating a gridlock that starved new car sales. Showrooms became eerily quiet, and automakers faced inventory stagnation. For the average consumer, the apocalypse carried contradictions. On one hand, the collapse of used car prices offered relief to those who had been priced out of the market during the years of inflated values. Bargains suddenly appeared in abundance, lightly used models available at half the cost of their pandemic-era peaks. First-time buyers, students, and families on tight budgets found opportunities that had been unthinkable just months earlier. Yet, this newfound affordability was shadowed by economic instability. The same forces that made cars cheaper also threatened jobs, wages, and lending conditions, leaving many hesitant to commit even when prices were attractive. Cultural attitudes toward car ownership began to shift in tandem. For decades, vehicles had been symbols of freedom, prosperity, and individuality. The inflated market had intensified that symbolism, turning even modest sedans into tokens of financial achievement. But as values imploded, so too did the mythology. Cars were recast not as status markers, but as burdens, liabilities that drained resources rather than securing them. Conversations around mobility shifted toward pragmatism. Leasing, ride-sharing, and subscription models gained traction as people reconsidered whether long-term ownership made sense at all. The collapse also highlighted the fragility of the broader financial system's dependence on vehicles as collateral. Auto loans had been packaged, securitized, and traded much like mortgages before the housing crisis. Investors seeking steady returns had poured billions into these securities, confident that the physical nature of cars provided safety. When repossessions flooded the market and collateral values plunged, Those securities shook under the strain. Financial institutions accustomed to stability found themselves facing uncertainty, while regulators scrambled to assess the systemic risk. Communities built around car culture suffered in quieter, more intimate ways. Independent dealerships that had been family businesses for generations closed their doors, unable to withstand the devaluation of their inventories. Mechanics who relied on steady streams of maintenance and repair work watched demand shift unpredictably, as owners abandoned vehicles rather than fixing them. Enthusiast circles, once thriving on the notion of cars as collectible investments, fractured as resale values evaporated. What had been a shared passion increasingly resembled a cautionary tale. The human stories embedded in the crisis added a tragic dimension. Families who had stretched their budgets to secure reliable transportation for work or school suddenly found themselves underwater, forced to choose between keeping a car they could not afford or surrendering it and facing the logistical nightmare of life without one. Young buyers who had been lured into subprime loans during the height of the boom felt particularly betrayed, realizing that the vehicles they paid so dearly for were worth only a fraction of their purchase price. For many, the car that was supposed to symbolize progress became instead a source of shame and financial ruin. Government officials and policymakers debated responses, but the nature of the crisis defied simple solutions. Unlike housing, cars are designed to decline in value, and no amount of stimulus could change the fundamental truth of depreciation. Subsidies or bailouts for dealers or lenders risked public backlash, while direct assistance to consumers raised complex questions about fairness. Some proposed stricter regulation of auto lending practices, while others argued for incentives to encourage mobility alternatives. Yet the core reality persisted. The market had corrected itself, brutally and without room for negotiation. The ripple effects reached into unexpected corners of society. Insurance companies recalibrated their models as claims payouts suddenly exceeded vehicle values, forcing adjustments in premiums. Rental agencies, which had once profited from inflated resale prices by offloading fleets at peak value, found themselves stuck with cars worth less than the loans used to acquire them. Even scrapyards saw unusual pressure, as older vehicles were discarded in higher volumes than usual, overwhelming capacity and disrupting secondary markets for parts and materials. Technology played a decisive role in amplifying the apocalypse. Online car buying platforms, which had promised transparency and efficiency, accelerated the downward spiral by making price comparisons brutally efficient. Consumers no longer needed to visit multiple dealerships to understand the collapse. A few clicks laid bare the trajectory of plummeting values. Algorithms adjusted in real time, ensuring that no seller could escape the gravity of the crash. What once had been a fragmented market dominated by regional trends became a unified stage where depreciation unfolded at lightning speed. Amid the chaos, psychological shifts took hold. For years, the public had been conditioned to believe that cars, even used ones, were investments in mobility that at least retained substantial value. The apocalypse shattered that conditioning, forcing a reckoning with the impermanence of material goods. Discussions once dominated by trim levels and horsepower gave way to sobering questions about financial literacy, consumer protection, and the sustainability of ownership itself. People began to view vehicles less as extensions of identity and more as tools, useful but transient. Yet the narrative was not entirely bleak. The correction, brutal though it was, cleared the air of distortions that had warped the market. Genuine affordability re-entered the conversation, even if it came at the cost of widespread financial pain. Buyers who had once been excluded found opportunities to access transportation again, while innovative models of mobility gained momentum. Car-sharing cooperatives expanded in urban centers, subscription-based services drew interest from cautious consumers, and public transit advocates seized the moment to push for investment in alternatives. Out of the ruins, new ideas about how societies move began to crystallize. The apocalypse also served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring natural economic rhythms. For years, experts had warned that the soaring values were unsustainable, yet enthusiasm drowned out skepticism. The lesson now sat in plain view. Markets can be distorted for a time by supply shocks, artificial scarcity, and consumer psychology, but they cannot escape gravity forever. The used car market, once a symbol of resilience, had succumbed to the very forces it had seemed to defy. The spectacle of the collapse played out daily in scenes both dramatic and mundane, Rows of unsold vehicles gathering dust under dealership lights. Auctioneers struggling to muster bids on cars that once sparked frenzied competition. Consumers scrolling through listings stunned by how little their once valuable assets were worth. Tow trucks arriving in neighborhoods to collect repossessed vehicles. The mechanical groan of chains and winches punctuating the silence of foreclosed dreams. Each image contributed to the sense of inevitability, of a market unraveling before everyone's eyes. For those who had lived through it, the memory of the apocalypse would not fade quickly. The collapse reshaped perceptions of value, risk, and ownership in ways that statistics alone could not capture. It was not merely an economic correction, it was a cultural rupture. A moment when millions realized simultaneously that the foundation beneath their assumptions was fragile. The used car, once an unremarkable fixture of everyday life, had become the symbol of an era's excess and its reckoning. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on used car prices crashing? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.